IMF debt outrage and the letter to Washington. But who really owes whom? We take an audit. The crackling sound of reggae, the Committee of Parliament that is singing way off key. Plus, return to sender. Is the Russian vaccine on the way back to Moscow? On the memo tonight, are we better off than we were 2 weeks ago? Gashuri throws a punch at tweeting MPs with crocodile tears. The kicker is a preview of the JSC's Supreme Court vetting next week. Or is it a preliminary objection? We'll hear the submissions. Yvonne's take is an elusive search for transparency and a few scriptures. And the angle is about anger online and a reality check. Our sign language gangster is Njoki Shege. All right, let's get this show on the road. Francis, reggae, nobody can stop reggae, that's what they said, but in Parliament, maybe it has not stopped, but the sounds there are crackling and probably off tune.
Maybe a bit of the volume is low, but as we said last week, the specific timelines that had been issued in November last year, everything else seems to have worked as planned until we got to the National Assembly and the Senate. There was an April 4th deadline that has not been met and clearly won't be met because
so what's happening now?
We are past there. But now what is interesting is that the Joint Committee of the National Assembly and the Senate on Legal Affairs, first of all, came and sought some more time. And they gave a very interesting explanation that one of the reasons they wanted some more time is to seek expert opinion on proposals in the document, as well as how to deal with some of the recommendations that came from various stakeholders during the public participation process. And there was divided opinion on whether members of parliament can actually change anything in that document, or whether they're supposed to approve the document or reject it as is, because in any case, it will still go to members of the public, the electorate, to make a decision at the ballot in a referendum. So that is the single issue that is quite contentious. And today, early in the morning, we saw that news conference by Okongo Omogeni, who chairs the Legal Affairs Committee in the Senate, giving an explanation as to why some of the recommendations that came from especially IEBC are very, very, very particular and must be met. For example, you remember IEBC came to the Joint Legal Affairs Committee and said BBI proponents were wrong insofar as the creation of the 70 constituencies is concerned. And that is a very contentious matter because the IEBC team, they said they needed at least 2 years to do boundaries delimitation. And so the Joint Legal Affairs Committee is asking whether the considerations that were made by, the recommendations that were made by IEBC ought to be considered. So that is where we are. The long and short of it is the June referendum date that had been set technically looks very uncertain, because by the time the two houses resume sittings next month, by the time members of parliament...
the special sitting is now off the table.
It was supposed to be sometime next week, according to the majority leader in the National Assembly. If there was
something to discuss, but now...
Yeah, nothing to discuss. In any case, the two committees, the Joint Committee says it is going to submit that report when the houses resume. That should be about 4th of May or thereabout. So technically it means a June referendum date looks extremely uncertain, unless something very magical and reggae-like happens.
Linus, this is clearly a political process, and one would have thought that after that BBI handshake parade that we saw it was a week ago, exactly a week ago actually, that things would smoothen out even in Parliament. But now we seem to see a very interesting turn of events there. Francis saying, well, the June deadline is now virtually impossible to achieve, and with that, lots of uncertainties. Even the very question that members of parliament can actually attempt to change something in that document.
I think what we are also witnessing right now is a process that could be facing challenges because of things that are under the surface, not above the surface. You know, things like the timetable, the committees that are working, those are things that we can see. The BBI process, in my view, is finally facing the problem it was likely to face because of the 2022 election. And then there is also the question of what was the trade-off? What really was the deal between President Uhuru Kenyatta and former Prime Minister Raila Odinga, especially with regard to the 2022 election? Because when you saw the ODM brigade, Joe, suddenly starting to introduce positions that essentially complicated this process, then it means they're saying, okay, we had given you this, that includes 70 constituencies, a majority of which respects that one man, one vote, one man, one shilling principle, which President Kenyatta's base has been campaigning for. More constituencies to areas that have the largest population. That is something that we know has been pursued not just in BBI, but also during, Francis, you remember the finance bill.
Revenue sharing formula discussion.
Because these are the issues that were really pertinent to these areas that are populated. And ODM, the Raila Odinga side, said, okay, you can have that. They have never told anybody what they asked for in return. Because you look at that BBI document, the regions of ODM, the regions of Raila Odinga really don't get a lot of those constituencies that are going to be allocated. So I think, I'm speculating here, and luckily we are allowed to speculate on NewsGirl, that possibly the deal was around 2022. And if it's not clear, then we will slow down the process. And something natural. So there's one more thing that I just want to point out. Come June, the election process will take a natural flow. People who want to run for president will be positioning themselves for president. Those who want to run for governor and senate and all that, we will be in an electioneering mode because we'll be just a year and 1 month or a year and 2 months to the election date. So beyond June, I don't think the secretariat, whatever we can call it, the teams that lead the BBI process will have control. Politics will set in, electioneering will set in, and it'll be very difficult to actually insert BBI into the process.
Interesting what you say, Linus, because I remember not too long ago, perhaps a month ago, when this whole noise started within the BBI handshake team, where you had people like Senator James Orengo and even my MP Otindi Amolo basically saying that there were some people who are trying to hijack this BBI process to influence how 2022 would play out, which actually just pointed to the fact that there was a 2022 element in all these conversations that were going on. But Yvonne, where does this now leave us? Because there are many timelines that are now basically out of sync, because the election date, Francis told us it is 9th of August next year, is cast in stone, at least the stone here being the Constitution.
Unless otherwise.
Yes, I mean, something really spectacular needs to happen.
Right.
There are a few that people have suggested, but as it is now, constitutionally, we need to have the elections in August next year, and that is sort of like the immovable post. And yet all of these things have to fit in there, and we have this elephant in the room of the constituencies. I had actually Okongo Mogeni talk about it today. Chebukati said 2 years. We don't have 2 years, but here we are. We have not even started the whole process of a referendum.
Indeed, and that is what I wanted to point out. I mean, there's the politics of it that's obviously holding this process back, but there's the issue of the delimitation of boundaries. It's not as simple as saying, okay, so we have 70 new constituencies. You have to drop the boundaries. You have to, you know, and it's always an emotive issue, so you can bet that there will be court cases, there will be
injunctions,
injunctions that will be put up on those 70 new constituencies. But the politics aside, there's also another big impediment to this one, and that is, the court cases that are in place. So two important injunctions that for sure guarantee that, the June date is completely out of whack. So first of all, there was the injunction against the IEBC from doing anything preparation-wise for a possible referendum until that case that has been filed by, I think, 7 petitioners is heard and determined. Then there was another injunction that was then put in, I think about, 3 to 4 weeks ago, where, Parliament is barred from onward transmission of that Constitutional Amendment Bill 2020 to the President, who would then, of course, now send it to IEBC for preparation of the referendum. So even these processes that we're talking about, with the report from the Joint Legal Affairs Committees from both houses, coming up with that, presenting it on the floor, even if they pass that stage, they will meet that court injunction, which means they cannot then transmit that bill to the President and then onward to preparation for a referendum. And then, of course, there's the judgment on the case itself. All parties have been heard. The judgment is due to be delivered on notice, but from what we are hearing, not any time earlier than June. So either way, this shows, what it'll be. And let's assume that the court cases go in favor, or against the petitioners, and, the BBI process continues. How much time does IEBC need to start preparing for a referendum? You have to clean up a register, you have to check the equipment, there's budgets that need to be put in place. And remember, as Linus has mentioned, they're also going to be starting the process of preparing for the election in 2022. Reggae has been stopped.
And side by side.
And Yvonne, you didn't mention that those guys, even if there is a ruling in favor, they could appeal.
They could appeal to the
Court of Appeal
and
all
then
the way
go
to the
Supreme Court. So, I mean, there's just political, legal, quite a few challenges in the way.
Francis, I'll give you the last one.
Okay.
Let me hear from Jamila.
Yeah, just something Yvonne said, the fact that we have the elections coming in 2022. I'm sure the proponents of BBI wish that they had more time between now and the election so that they could actually continue with this process and see it to completion, because they had hoped that it was supposed to be when? By June?
June, yeah.
Between June 7th and 14th, that the presidential assent was supposed to have been given for the referendum, which, of course, as you said, clearly is not going to happen. And then, of course, the COVID-19 is also a factor in all this, because one, there are no campaigns at all, no political meetings, so there can be no campaigns for BBI. In fact, when I was sitting here listening to you talk, I was thinking maybe this is the time when the government can actually spend a bit of money to go and educate people about BBI when they're in their homes. I don't know. I think I'm just thinking very innocently, but maybe this is the time when people should be...
people's homes with BBI right now.
Watu wadropiwe hata kani booklets hapo nyumbani zimekuwa translated, ama they buy airtime, media houses. I mean, be very happy to translate to send the message to people, but still, even COVID-19 has affected the whole BBI process. Like anything that can go wrong is going wrong. You hear Murphy's Law? I think is what is happening, Murphy's Law with the BBI process. Even the mood itself, like tumesahau, literally. We were eating BBI, sleeping BBI, public rallies. Even I'm sure Gashuri and his political desk wameboeka kidogo hawana politics every weekend. But seriously, I have even noticed in our bulletins, we are telling more stories that are helping people. Yesterday we did a whole story about how we are over-medicating. We talked about the oxygen that is needed in the hospitals. If we had politics, we'd not be able to have time to do all those stories. So the mood in the country is like BBI imetulia kabisa, reggae iko kwa volume ile ya chini kabisa that Gashuri speaks about. It's because of COVID-19. Of course, it's our priority right now. I remember, I think it was Governor Oparanya saying that the 14 billion or so that was being said was needed for referendum should be put to use in terms of trying to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's a very interesting turn of events.
Joe, I look at it this way. There are two forces that I would say are antagonistic insofar as the BBI process is concerned. There's one team that is totally opposed to any changes to the constitution by all means, for whatever reason. And on the other hand, there is a team that was dissatisfied with what was the content of the document. And so that which was not achieved during what Linus was talking about, what was given and what was promised. There's a team that probably felt we were shortchanged at a certain point, and so Using the parliamentary route, this is an opportunity to inject a few of the things that probably were required. If you feel like you needed to have some more constituencies and you didn't get, maybe this is an opportunity to try and trigger a scenario where you get them. But now, if you are to reopen the document, how much can you reopen the document? Because there are those who are probably not very keen on the number of constituencies, but they are keen on something else. How will you deny them an opportunity to inject that which they wanted in that document, whereas you have given those keen on constituencies an opportunity to inject it? And let me tell you how antagonistic this thing will be. There's a text here from Moses Kuria, the MP for Gatundu South. Just look at what he has said, and it will inform some of the discussions around that National Assembly and the Senate. I have many problems with BBI, especially on the top-ups that will result in the 180 nominated MPs or thereabout. However, the stalemate and the so-called experts is only because some forces have conspired against 70 new constituencies because they are deemed to be benefiting Mount Kenya. You see, now, that is one aspect of the politics that you will now see introduced in the whole discussion. What will stop another region from saying, actually, how the constituencies were distributed was not fair, so we deserve some. There are some counties that did not get any constituencies or were not proposed to get any constituencies out of the 70. So they'll say, we also deserve one, so redistribute. You heard what IEBC said. All you can do is say the number of extra constituencies that we need to create. Leave the business of boundaries, delimitation, and allocation to us. So politics proper. And you see, truth be told, amending the constitution is a political process, largely. So some of these texts that you see from Moses and other MPs will come in handy, and it will be politics full-blown.
But one must ask, Nina Stephen, as you come in, that if this process, strictly speaking, I mean, would need just the support of the MPs who would be the ODM column and the MPs who still support the president. I mean, by MPs, I mean both houses. Then one would imagine that either they have not been whipped in line, because this sounded to me at some point as a high priority issue, both for Raila Odinga and Uhuru Kenyatta. And how is it that they have not rallied their troops in parliament to align the ducks in a row, as it were, so that this thing can actually keep to those timelines? There might be something else that we do not know that is going on, that is perhaps either intentional on whichever part, whichever side, or the unlikely one is that these MPs are basically doing their own thing, and there is no control from anywhere.
You see, Joe, to line the ducks, you will need water. You don't line them up on dry land. And what I'm talking about here is something that we discussed some time back here. And the genuine question, which should be, what is the constitutional moment for BBI? Because if we compare BBI to other previous efforts at reforming the constitution, you'll always find that there were these common aspirations that even got KANU to bend backwards on the 2nd of December 1991 and say, you see, we can't go beyond here. Everybody wants multi-party politics. Everybody wants a multi-party system of government. What BBI is lacking, and I think we are saying this in manner of repeating, is a constitutional moment. Constitutional moment would have propelled this process. It doesn't wait for COVID restrictions to end, because right now, and we've said this before, it requires too much of, can I call it inducement, can I call it
cajoling and all of that.
Yes, you need to sort of refuel it and for it to keep moving. When there are no rallies, reggae seems to stop. Now there are no rallies, reggae is turning into blues, led by Orengo and this team. The tune is changing. You can hear the DJ changing the tune of this music. So one thing that is biting BBI in the wrong places is the absence of a constitutional moment.
And the COVID situation too.
All right. So obviously that's a conversation that we'll have to keep an eye on because it is still going on. But I want us to just touch briefly on this before we take a break, because this week we have seen quite some activity, mainly on social media, touching on the issue of debt. Yvonne, I know you have been doing many explainers here, so we're going to start with you. Explain. Because there's a sense in which it is unprecedented. I mean, we have not seen this kind of outrage, at least what we saw on social media against the question of debt. But it doesn't take away the fact that this issue of debt has been in the air for some time, and it had to, at some point, it was going to come to this.
I don't know if anybody recalls when the Jubilee administration, then it was, TNA, and that it was a coalition. Now it's a full party. In 2013, back when ODM was on the other side, remember when they were shouting that this administration is over borrowing and over stealing. At the time, I think in their first 3 years of this administration, they borrowed more than President Kibaki had borrowed in his entire two terms. So where are we today? The country's public debt as of December 2020 stands at 7.2 trillion shillings. That's how much we owe. Now, if you take a look at where we were in 2013, when this administration came to power, our public debt was at 1.9 trillion. So it's 7 times what it was in 2013. Here's another thing. In 2013, we were committing 284.1 billion shillings to pay our debts. And as of today, and these are just the ones that we've asked for debt holidays from. We were supposed to pay the Paris Club 33 billion. We had another 27 billion shillings to pay by June to the Chinese. So we've gotten like total debt waivers of about 40.6 billion shillings. Just take a look at that. And, Francis is also another guy who has some interesting numbers. So I will leave it at that. By the way, the government is expected to borrow over 1 trillion shillings in this current financial year that ends in June. That is in, what, 3 months?
That should be getting close to what the Kibaki administration borrowed in 10 years.
Borrowed in 10 years. And, if you take a look at, staggering. There's some other numbers, I think, that were put out by the government in November last year, where they actually put the public debt at 8.41 trillion shillings. Now, this would have been over and above the ceiling. And you understand now, when there was talk of moving the debt ceiling to 12 trillion, in fact, now there's talk that the debt ceiling, they're mulling over taking it up to 15 trillion. In fact, there's some other numbers, and I think we've borrowed how much have we borrowed, at least just for COVID? It's about 700 billion shillings, from IMF, but this is all total in terms of, and grants as well. So you can see where we are and why Kenyans are alarmed, just from the figures.
Well, you see, let me put it this way. First of all, there's absolutely nothing wrong with borrowing. Many people are living, are surviving, are financing their day-to-day activities through borrowed money. Many businesses have been established through borrowing. People have built houses, bought cars, and done many things
Businesses run on loans.
Even businesses are running on loans. So the principle is that there's nothing wrong with borrowing. As long as you're borrowing for the right reasons, at the right cost, and with the right intention. The challenge is if you borrow, and then the projects that are earmarked for financing using the borrowed resources either are exaggerated or there's corruption.
Or we don't know anything about
Or we don't know anything about it.
As was said about the Eurobond.
The challenge is borrowing, and you commit the money to mega infrastructure projects, and then all of a sudden you hear issues of corruption in the same mega projects. That's where the whole issue is. You've heard stories about dams, we've heard stories about roads, we've heard stories about even KEMSA that we're talking about that remains unresolved. Those are some of the things that annoy people, that raise the anger that you saw the entire week. While I highly doubt that IMF is going to recall or cancel the loan because of the concerns that were raised by Kenyans, but I would imagine that they have taken note of the concerns.
They issued a statement.
Yeah.
But the statement only said that, you know what, if this money doesn't come, it means that there will be a lot of other problems.
Yes.
Because the government will have to find ways of raising money through higher taxes and job losses and everything. And also, they also underscored that fact that this was concessionary loan, which means that the terms of payment are more favorable, and it was partly going to be used to, as the economists would say, retire the more expensive loans, basically pay off some
from Peter to pay Paul.
But in this case, where those ones are mainly commercial loans, which had higher interest rates, so that you can pay, but then now you are paying slowly over a longer period.
This is what I would have expected before Jamila comes in. When these concerns were raised by Kenyans on Twitter and everywhere else, I think it would have been nice for the National Treasury to tell people, ladies and gentlemen, this is how much we have borrowed. This is what we have done with the money. We borrowed this money at this cost, so we owe A, B, C, D, this so much money, so that people can start appreciating what has happened to the money that has been borrowed. But when there is silence, it tends to show that probably something is being hidden. But if there was a good explanation as to where the money has gone to, maybe it would make sense. However, when there are questions about corruption, when there are questions about mismanagement of the same resources, when there are questions about the borrowed money ending up in the pockets of a few people, there is a problem. If time allows, you remember in December 2018, President Uhuru Kenyatta, while in Mombasa, during that joint interview with various media houses, that question of debt came up, and this is what he had to say about the borrowing.
It's not about incurring debt. It's about how you use that debt. Are you using that debt to expand your economy? Are you using that debt to expand your GDP? Are you using that debt to open up your country, right? I have almost 60% of the Republic of Kenya connected to power. My friend, for those kind of reasons, I will borrow.
Okay.
Good friend.
Recently.
I will, and I will continue to borrow. Yeah?
Use it to consume.
Not to consume, to develop.
Well, yeah, you see, Joe, when times were good, then even the deputy president defended the borrowing at that time, and this is what he had to say.
Any borrowing is borrowing that is measured, that we know what it is going to do, and that we have the capacity to pay, and that it is in the interest of the country. We are a responsible and prudent government. That is why you can witness a working standard gauge railway. You can witness roads everywhere in the country.
So the best response to the questions that have been raised about the debt is to come up with a substantive and comprehensive report. This is how much we have borrowed, this is what we have done with the money, and this is where your money is.
We have not consumed it, we have used it for development.
So if that report came up, then Kenyans would have a document to interrogate, to deal with. So this is where the money is. And maybe you would silence a few critics, but also at the same time, it would open up room for a few more questions as to how much has been invested where and whether there is value for money.
I think we need to take a break, Joe, and then maybe we can come back and continue with this discussion. Robert is talking very loudly in our ears. We're taking a short break. We'll be back with more of this discussion about Kenya's debt in a short while.